Today I'm going to be looking at the Netflix movie What Happened to Monday. The short of it is, I think it is actually an excellent story of a near dystopian future. We follow 7 identical sisters during a particular week of their life that is especially tumultuous. And if you're just looking for whether it's good or not, and if you like sort of a science fiction, but not, super science fiction, not real far in the future, but a near future, and of a possible climate that we might live in, where siblings are regulated by the government, how many children you can have, basically. That might be something you'd be definitely interested in, I would say. Not only does it have good world building, but also it's fairly well acted and whatnot throughout. And it moves along at a pretty good clip, and it has a few twists at the end, which you can kind of see and not see, depending on how observant you're paying attention to. But it's still good. Still good to see it all come out. So go watch it if you don't want to have the full thing ruined, because I will be talking about everything in the movie in the rest of this. So the next part that I really want to talk about is their world that they have created. And since it's just near future, they don't have to go crazy on the technology, but they do give a couple of interesting parts to it. So we'll just list a few of them. For starters, everyone has like a phone in their hand. So in the palm of your hand, there is almost like a touchscreen type device. I guess it's implanted. It looks almost like a hologram that comes up, so it's not real clear exactly what that is. They also wear a bracelet for identification purposes, but the bracelet also acts as a computer of sorts, so it could also be generated a bit from there. They never go into detail about it. People just click on it like it's a tablet, basically, and use it to make phone calls and other sorts of information, which could definitely be something that would occur in the next 20, 30 years, maybe. Of course, then they have the bracelet, which also acts, I believe, as their wallet as well, of sorts, and a laptop computer. And they have regular computers a bit as well. Guns seem to be fingerprint locked, so you have to have identification fingerprint to be able to use it, so you can't take a police officer's weapon and use it immediately as your own, although they do get around that, interestingly enough, later on. And we only see a private citizen really have one other gun, and that's because they're doing something illegal. Not wrong, I don't think. They're actually making the moral decision, but it is against the laws that are currently in the country. So the hook for this is that the world population has been rising, and it's been hard to feed everyone. So they have introduced genetically modified food, which grows much faster and seems to fix that problem. Like, now we can grow enough food. However, though, problem came along with the genetically modified food is that people started having lots of more and more children, such as, even in this group, 7. So that makes the problem worse now. Even though we can feed everyone, now we've got everybody having more kids. So our solution actually had an unintended side effect that's making now the problem worse, which is sometimes how these things work out. So I thought that was interesting. The other thing too that's interesting about this is that they never really come out clearly and say whether, for sure that there is a food problem or not, or the population problem. They leave that nebulous, which is, I think, a strong point to the movie, because you're relying on the government to tell you things, and then they're being shady, and then later on, as we find out, they're being completely crooked. So all that stuff that they were telling us could have just been for control of the population. None of it had to be actually in reality. But again, we don't know everything, like life. So the movie does leave it actually where you can interpret it either way. So to combat this problem, the government imposes this law that you can only have one sibling. Basically, they call it one sibling, I guess, to differentiate it from China's one-child policy. They didn't want to step on too many toes there, but it's basically the same thing. So every family can only have one child. If you have more than that, the extra, children, as it were, are cryogenically frozen, and they're put in suspended animation till the population food problem gets better, and then they will be thawed out, as it were. Of course, as you may have already guessed from this, and was pretty obvious, I think, although they didn't show you till later on in the movie, they are actually killing those children. They are not being cryogenically frozen, which, of course, you realize that if there's an overpopulation problem, there's a resource problem. They didn't really touch on fuel energy problems, but obviously that would be a problem as well, if they're saying that the food's a problem as well. They're not going to waste energy on keeping people cryogenically frozen. So as soon as they said that, I was like, yeah, they're not keeping children around. I seriously doubt that. And they aren't. immediately incinerating them. Then, let's see. Okay, so let's go to the identical twins now that we're following in the story. 7 girls, and they each have a name for each day of the week, and that's their day to go outside. So that's how you get the names Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday. And I think the actress does a good job. Obviously, she cuts her hair different. She also has different personalities, which you do have to go a little bit with the movie on that, because usually identical twins actually have very similar personalities and similar interests. I know of some cases where they've had identical twins that were separated at birth. They get together when they're 40 years old. They have the same mustache style. They even have a similar occupation. I know they don't always, though. So I think it is playing a little bit with that. But you can also justify that because not only do you have to usually, when people are speculating about the future, you usually have to give the author at least one gimme. Okay, I'll go here. I'll accept this, and you make the rest of it believable based off of that. But even beyond that, since they have the genetically modified food introduced, that could also be playing a little bit of hijinks with it in some sort of fashion. So you just have to go with that and say, okay, well, they're supposed to be identical twins, but they actually have different personalities, which probably wouldn't be true, but they do. And they dress differently. They all act differently. And she does a good job of portraying that. It also, I don't know exactly how they put all 7 of them together, whether it was some sort of special effects or what exactly, or maybe they had an actress that had similar body shape sitting there and they just did the face, although it doesn't look like that. But whatever they did, put them together, it looks perfectly natural. No problem believing it, that these 7 people are in a room interacting with each other. So, kudos there. That's really hard. And they do rely a little bit on probably the clothing, just a little too much, but I would rather them do that than not be able to tell who is who when they're talking and just from a quick look. So I think they erred on the good side of caution. And they do something with her cheekbones. I'm assuming it's makeup, perhaps, where for some of the people, she has really kind of more of a little bit of a round, softer face, and then in other people, she has a much more angular face, which helps you differentiate them as well very quickly. So good job on that end. So moving on, I think all the performances were good. I don't think I would say anything was great necessarily, but it was all good. And there was no sore thumbs that stuck out in acting or anything like that. Again, with the dialogue, there's not a lot of necessarily memorable lines, but you do have memorable scenes that I can, pretty distinctly remember. And such as at one point, one of the girls sneaks out and hurts herself and actually cuts off a little bit of one of her fingertips. Well, and as the dad says, well, what happens to one of you has to happen to all of you, because they're all going to be pretending to be the same lady. So he actually cuts off all the other children's tip of their finger. And you even find out that he cries about it later because he didn't want to do that. But for them to pass as the same person, they actually have to, they can't be having a finger one day and missing a finger the next day. So that's not going to work. And so like I said, I don't remember any of the dialogue from that. None of it really stuck out at me. But it didn't stick out as a bad thing. And as a bad example of dialogue that always has stuck out to me is the line from Batman v Superman when Batman and Superman look at each other and go, "She with you? No, I thought she was with you." Terrible line in the trailer. I hoped it would work when it was actually in the movie in context. No, terrible, terrible line. Nothing like that. No stinkers. There was a boyfriend in the movie, and they do play him a little up too much. Like, you're not sure if he's a sexual predator at first, but it was just up the line of being, this is almost cartoony starting to be, which only stuck out because the rest of the movie was so good. But they didn't quite go far enough, and then they pull it back. He's much more in the latter part of the movie, and the last third, I guess. And he does a really good job all the way around too. So I appreciate that performance. Almost too cartoony though, and trying to pretend to be a sexual predator of sorts. And the music, I don't remember any of the music, good or bad. So again, it was at least serviceable. Nothing struck a bad chord that I remember, and nothing really stood out from the musical score. So as we follow the movie along, what we find is that Monday has betrayed her other sisters. And the Child Bureau Protective Services, whoever is rounding up the kids, is rounding up her sisters. But they're trying to keep it on the hush-hush because they don't want the public to know that 7 siblings were actually raised to adulthood, because they usually catch them when they're kids. So they're trying to keep it down so they just don't mob them immediately. Of course, that goes away a little bit as the movie goes along. They get more intense on trying to capture all of them, which they are kind of stuck in a house for a little bit, their house where they live at. And as it comes to find out later on, of course, the sisters weren't sure that they didn't even think that Monday betrayed them at the beginning. They thought she had gotten caught, and that they were slowly rounding up the others of them, as it were, too. So they were actually focused on releasing her, but then eventually they find out that no, she did betray them. And then they find out why. Well, she actually fell in love with that guy, and she was pregnant. And I do think that this is a very realistic portion of the movie, because parents in general, but in particular mothers, tend to be completely unreasonable and illogical where their children are concerned, especially the children's welfare. Everything for the children. And it would make sense that she behaved irrationally, because the rational thing to do would have been to tell her sisters, and then all of them brainstormed together, as was shown really was what they were supposed to be doing. Was they were 7 people working for one person's life, basically, this figment of all of them. And that's why one of the reasons she was able to do so much was because she was able to pull on the different resources of all of her different sisters, which had varying interests and that sort of thing. Well, she doesn't do that. She immediately goes into mom mode and wants to do anything to save her children, which is, the other 6 got to go so that I can live with my children. Of course, it never goes into explaining that she was actually pregnant with 2 children. So one of those would have been taken away when she went into the services, the Child Protective Bureau. But maybe she was also had an illegal deal with the person pushing that and running kind of that organization. So perhaps she was hoping that it would get a pass, or even one child would be frozen, but at least she could raise the other one or something like that. That was kind of the only little loophole on that end. But it, like I said, not really a big deal. Obviously, these people are already committing illegal acts. So, and as anyone knows, a lot of times the rules in our current society apply to the lower and middle classes, or even just the middle class. Sometimes they don't even apply to the lower class, the middle class in particular. But the elites like to skirt around those rules. And I'm sure that even in China, when they had their one-child policy, I'm sure that the people that were in charge, the elite, the power, they didn't limit themselves to one child. They got the exception, more likely than not. So she has a good reason to betray them, really. And that reason isn't given away, that she's pregnant. And they do a good job of telling the audience. And that's probably the most memorable line, because she kind of pats down around where her womb is. She's been shot and injured. She does end up dying Monday, by the way. But her children live. And she says, don't let them take them. Something along that line. So it's also not clear that Monday knows that the children are being incinerated. So that would be another loophole, perhaps, that she thought one would be frozen and the other would be raised. Or perhaps she was planning on just running away and raising both girls like her dad or her grandfather actually raised all 7 of them. Something along those sorts of lines. Overall, I would say it was definitely a good movie. Well worth your time. I love seeing a well-constructed near dystopian type future, or just a near future. And if you enjoy those types of movies that are actually well written and thought out, I believe that you'll definitely enjoy What Happened to Monday on Netflix. Netflix is pretty much killing it, except for a few little sour notes in there. But definitely their original programming is pretty special. And I can see where this sort of movie, I can't imagine it being released actually in the theaters as a big budget film. But hopefully it will get the appreciation and kind of the love that it deserves in Netflix. And that's my only concern really with Netflix productions, is I'm not sure how deep they kind of penetrate the culture, because there's such a media storm around big budget movies like the Marvel movies or the Star Wars movies. I mean, my God, I can't get away from the Star Wars, news. Everybody keeps talking about, oh, they released a picture of Luke holding something, or it's insanity. It is insane. But the one thing I think Netflix does have going for it is that, like, the new Star Wars movies that are being made by Disney, they aren't very good. They aren't good. And nostalgia and flash and a media campaign is only going to get them so far. I don't think they're going to be able to continue pushing this out forever. The low quality of the movies that they've been making. I was really surprised by Rogue One. I have a short review. Well, I watched only part of it, but I can't imagine any reason I would want to watch the rest of it. But definitely check out the Netflix original programming. I think it's good to support it. Certainly, they're trying to do something different, and we definitely need to give them a bit of recognition in that regard, and even paying for it. That way that they can continue making these, because they definitely are making something different than you're seeing up in the theaters from Disney and Fox and Warner Brothers and those sorts. If you have any questions,